Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Eithan Haim, who is a surgeon in Texas who blew the whistle about gender-affirming care, so-called, that was being performed in a Texas children's hospital, even though that hospital had said that they were not doing that anymore. He has since been persecuted by the Biden DOJ for pulling the pants down on child bottom surgery, if you'll allow a turn of phrase, and himself has doubled down on speaking the truth as he sees it. In this conversation, we talk about ethics in medicine, why he believes that gender ideology, particularly as it is being enacted by the medical profession, is nothing less than evil, and why he's standing up the way that he is. Wonderful man. If you want to help with his case, links to that are down there in the description. You can also follow him on Twitter, also linked in the description. And if you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the tip jars below. Without further ado, here is Eithan Haim. The interest in your story's kind of gone through different peaks, which is how internet attention goes. I mean, you can't really compete with an attempted assassination on the former president of the United States, of course, but
Yeah,
but
no way.
it peaked again in the spring, right? That's when a lot of
Yeah.
people were sharing it and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's because in January of 2024, that's, after 6 months of after the agents came to my house in June of 2023, like I wanted to remain anonymous. But then because we thought that like maybe they're just going to move on, like this whole thing is insane. So they're not going to pursue it. But then after a certain point, we knew the corruption was like so bad that there's no chance we're going to get out of it. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I had no choice, right? It was like I was backed into a corner. Of course, the only thing I can do is I have to tell the story publicly because they said they're going to take me to trial even if they're sure they're going to lose. It's like, of
Really?
course,
Wow.
yeah. So, yeah, and yeah, my attorneys, staked their careers on it, sent a letter to Congress. I mean, um, yeah, it's uh, really bad.
Wow. Why do you think this issue is commandeering the full force of the United States federal government?
You know, so I think that there's a couple of things in play, and I think I couldn't necessarily pin it down to one thing specifically, but there's something to be said when you have a large group of people embrace something that is obviously evil, completely illogical, and harms the most innocent people in our society. So whether that's for money or ideological reasons or cowardice doesn't really matter. But once it gets to a certain point where these people are on the record supporting something that's so obviously bad, their efforts to conceal and cover up the truth of the matter they'll go to any lengths possible because what they're going to have to face is that the children they believed they were protecting, and they were doing so for their own self-righteousness, were actually the ones who they were completely destroying. So, to self-reflect is to self-immolate. So the only option they have is to double down, right? Like the ones who they claim to be protecting, they had fundamentally destroyed them. So they're going to do anything they can to prevent that reality, prevent the truth from being acknowledged.
Hmm.
So you have a lot of people who are guilty, a lot of people in the federal government, from the president of the United States, the vice president, his cabinet, the bureaucracy, the law enforcement agencies, everyone. And these people had played a role. So they're going to do everything they can to prevent any type of accountability. But of
Hmm.
course, you know, when it comes to the matter of the truth, it always will find its way through the cracks.
Yeah. Yeah. How's your year been then? That's a lot of stress. Are you, what have
Y-
you learned about yourself being put in this
Yeah,
position?
you know, there's there's this quote from Solzhenitsyn where, because I read his book during the time that all this was happening in like when I was deciding to blow the whistle, and um, there's one it's one of his quotes that really kind of stands out. And it's like the force of resistance against tyranny is no greater than when it comes from like the average person who just wanted to be left alone, right? It's like someone who just wanted to take care of his family and work. And they know that if they decide to fight back, that decision is permanent. And that
They're
if they
locked
make
in.
that decision, like their entire life is going to be changed forever. And when they do make that decision, it's a form of suicide because the person who they once were, they have to destroy, they have to kill themselves off in order to be reborn as this new person who is able to withstand the fight to come. And it's this reason that these average people, who decide to fight back are the greatest form of resistance, right? And I think that's what I've realized because the person who I was, who was scared and maybe irresolute in certain circumstances had to be, no more, right? Like I had to abandon that part of myself and I had to discover a new part of myself that is able to take this thing, understand why it's happening, and understand why it's worth fighting against it. And as time goes on, it's become easier and easier because you realize the nature of this evil is so profound that, how could I ever look at myself in the mirror
Hmm.
when my children grow up and ask, well, you were there at that hospital. Like, why didn't you do something about it? So,
Yeah.
the one thing that, has been more stressful and is just working as, a new attending surgeon,
Oh,
right? Like,
starting over again?
no, yeah, well, I was starting my new job when everything was happening
Okay, yeah.
as a surgeon, right? And, I'm a general surgeon in a really small town outside of Dallas. So I would say it's less stress. Of course, this case is stressful, you can't minimize that. But, when you operate on sick people, people who are dying, who
Yeah.
there's there's only one chance they have, and it's between, and you're the one standing between them and them dying, right? And then you operate on them, like you care a lot about that, right?
Hmm.
So, that's what the thing that's been more kind of my focus is just taking care of
Yeah.
my patients.
Yeah. I can imagine being in that position, um, being kind of just responsible for somebody's life that acutely. And there's two ways that I think you can break as a human being. And by break, I mean directions that you can go. Uh, and it's kind of a stereotype that the doctor or the surgeon specifically, for some reason, can get a God complex. But I can also see that it could also deeply humble you if you have another set of values. Do you see that kind of being foisted on you, this decision? This.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the God complex is I think it's more a production, a result of popular fiction. Of course, there are certain instances where surgeons kind of adopt this God complex, but it's exceedingly rare.
Okay.
I've never seen it in any surgeon I've ever worked with, working with hundreds, probably close to 1,000. Well, probably hundreds. But yeah, the reason is because it is so humbling, exactly what you said. Like when you take someone to an operating room, you're submitting yourself to rules and laws that exist outside of your control. Surgeons by nature are intensely superstitious, right?
Hmm.
Where we don't say certain words like in the hospital, we never, use the word quiet or busy. Oh, things are just going to be fine, right? Like we never tell a patient, oh yeah, like this is going to be routine. Never. And the reason is because as a surgeon, the pain and suffering and the anxiety after you take someone to an operating room, you understand that they're putting a huge amount of trust in you because they're gonna oftentimes you have 15, 20 minutes to meet them beforehand, right? You tell them the situation and they put their trust in you. A couple minutes later, they're rolling back to a room they've never been to. They're naked, paralyzed, unconscious, naked around a bunch of strangers with sharp objects. And I'm going to be the one cutting them open.
Yeah.
So to do that, every day, I mean, that's a humbling experience. So every movement in the operating room, right, is driven by our recognition that the person we're working on is a human who's worthy of dignity. And,
Hmm.
afterwards, when you do a big case, every single minute you think about that person. Like I did a big case yesterday. I
Yeah.
just saw him, and it's, every single minute you think, how are they doing? How's their breathing? How's their pain? And,
Yeah.
is anything going wrong? So,
A part of this phenomena of gender ideology being implemented by the medical industry in America and abroad seems to me to be the manifestation of a particular view of humanity and of the body specifically. I mean, it's right in the literature. And there's something wrong in the ideology that caused it to become what you call evil. And I want to get into why you think it's evil because that's a really juicy statement. But I can see as a surgeon, just like imagining myself being a surgeon, which I don't have the constitution to do, but you you interact with this human being who's got a problem and you're treating the human being, but then they get knocked out and you're dealing with a bunch of flesh. You're dealing with this biological organism that so is there like this dual lens where you look at the human in one direction and they're a human being and you look at the human being as just like this clump of cells? Like, is there this dual frame that you're straddling?
yeah.
And I wonder if that materialistic point of view is what feeds or fed into gender ideology.
And I think the it has to be the mutual inclusion of both perspectives where there is this biological like physical component because like yesterday when I was operating, right? Tough case, really, really tough case. I mean, really, really hard. And I was up all night because I was operating all night too. So when you're in the OR, it's like there's this physical component where there's this tumor, you feel it's huge, it's bleeding, and you have to get it out in order to get this person back to living their normal life. So, yeah, there's this physical component where you have to solve a physical problem, but that's medicine too. Like for medicine, internal medicine doctors, you recognize physical problems and there are physical solutions to it. Like if someone's blood pressure is like 230, over 120, then they're gonna like have a stroke because their brain's gonna bleed, right? You have to provide a physical solution to that. So
Yeah.
you have medications that widen the blood vessels, decrease the pressure, bring the blood pressure down. Um, but in the case of gender ideology, I think what it is the separation of the biological component from the spiritual component. Because when you look at an individual simply as a clump of cells, then that gives you license to do anything you want. Because if that person is just a composite of biological matter, then you can play God and then reconstruct them any way you want. You can claim to be doing the righteous thing when in reality it's not the righteous thing, right? It's,
Hmm.
it's the exact opposite. So, when we say it's evil, yeah, that's what it is. It's evil because it's the antithesis of what a doctor is meant to do, which is to heal, right? To preserve and strengthen naturally occurring physiology in order to allow human flourishing. Whereas what these doctors do is the opposite of healing, which is to destroy naturally occurring physiology to limit their ability to flourish. So it's not just like a few degrees away from medicine, right? It's not like here's medicine, which is like oriented this direction. It's not like bad medicine, which is like usually just poor execution, right? It's like
Or bad
someone making a
ideas. Yeah.
bad decision.
Bad
Yeah,
decisions.
this is anti-medicine because it's oriented in the exact opposite direction.
Hmm.
It's not meant to get these people back to their regular lives, right? To like preserve what's already been created. It's to create something new, but something that is permanently diseased. And that is not medicine, that's anti-medicine, which makes it evil.
Hmm. When did you first come across the gender medicalization?
I always kind of knew about it um, as like a thing that existed on the periphery of society. Like with Jazz Jennings and I Am Jazz, the show, because that was he lived in Boca Raton, Florida, which is where I went to medical school.
Oh,
So I always kind of knew like it was happening, but it was always such a fringe thing. It was only after COVID that it became more, um, I saw it more as like a existential problem to the dignity of the profession.
hmm.
Because after COVID, it began proliferating in all these different children's hospitals, right? In California, Washington, Oregon, New York. And you see it all over the internet, like with like libs at TikTok and these other big stories that came out. You can't believe what these doctors are saying, where I remember a video from Massachusetts General, Harvard, where you have like these bubbly young female doctors talking about gender affirming hysterectomies. And like a hysterectomy is not a small deal. There's very important real estate in that area, right? Like very important real estate.
Such as
And
what? I mean,
like your uterus, it's like you have your
okay.
ureters, which connects your kidneys to your bladder. Like these tiny little like half centimeter tubes that like you can easily mess up, right? There's a bunch of nerves in that area. Your rectum is right behind it. Your bladder is right below it and in front of it. So yeah, it's like a big deal. You can get hernias, bleeding, right? Infections. So it's not a small thing. And I think it was happening during a time where I was getting more authority, like during my surgical training, where
Hmm.
like you begin to recognize like what it means to bring someone to an operating room. Like you better make sure that there's a problem that you're fixing, right? You better make sure that there's a good chance their life is going to be better afterwards than before. Of course, you can never guarantee it. That's a risk they take with, informed consent, right? And you explain that to them that things can go wrong. But what these people are doing is the most vicious thing I could ever imagine. But it
Hmm.
was becoming like institutionally legitimate as a standard, and everyone knows that this is completely insane.
Well,
That there's no legitimacy to it.
at what point did you have to face it as not just a cultural weirdness, fringe phenomenon, but actually have to look at it? And what did you see when you first like looked into it?
Yeah, well, so all this happened during my surgical training when I was in Houston, right? Baylor College of Medicine. An amazing program, and one of the hospitals we work at the most is Texas Children's Hospital, which even now after all this happened, like still an amazing hospital because everything else they do is they take the sickest kids and they do everything possible to make these kids better. And when I was working there, we would take care of these kids who had these diseases that would just affect every component of their life. And,
Hmm.
we would be the ones who operate on them. And during that time, you get to know like this endless oceanic, like profound level of suffering they have to go through.
Hmm.
Because we're the ones who like change their dressings, look at their wounds, right? And they're just screaming and crying in pain. And you see it every single day for months. So you get to know what their pain is like, but you can never really understand it, of course. But then you also get to know that these kids were just average kids, right? That they were just like me when I was their age. So, even if it's a 13-year-old kid with a disease that affects every part of his life, he was just like me when I was 13, like just wanted to like ride bikes and hang out with his friends and chase girls and get into trouble, right? So despite these kids having diseases that would make their life so atypical, they were still the most normal kids, just like everyone else. They inherently knew what it was to be healthy. So because when I was there, like working there, operating on these kids, like we recognized that they just wanted to live a normal life. And because that, we would do everything we could to make them better, to make sick kids healthy again, so that they can go out into the world. But it was during that time, like 2022, that
Hmm.
I found out that, while we were working on kids to make them healthy again, there were other children, within Texas Children's Hospital where you had perfectly healthy kids who were being taken to the same operating rooms, and poison was being implanted into their bodies in order to make them sick for the rest of their lives. So once I knew that, right? Where in one instance, we're taking kids with the worst disease, something they had no control over. We're trying to make them healthy again. But in this other group, they're taking perfectly healthy children and then making them sick for the rest of their lives. And in both situations, it's no fault of their own, right? Because in
Hmm.
one case, it was a disease that they were born with, but in another case, it was corruption of doctors in society that had put them into that situation. So both are going to be tethered to the boundaries of a hospital for the rest of their life. So it's like, people were telling me they were doing this at Texas Children's Hospital. And it was after the hospital said unequivocally that they were shutting down their program because of potential criminal liability. So they were not only doing this to children, but they were lying about it.
Well,
And
how do you see what they're doing as evil's the big word, but poisoning and mutilating children, and they don't see it that way?
yeah, so the reason it's poisoning and mutilating is because it's kind of goes back to kind of what I was saying earlier. It's like this idea that medicine is meant to preserve and strengthen naturally occurring physiology. And that's an idea that came from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, right? It's like the idea of what a doctor is, what it is to heal and to treat. So what they're doing by implanting a puberty blocking device into these children or giving them hormones is to put them into a state of pathology, and what I mean by pathology is a deviation of health, a deviation of that which is natural. So a kid with perfectly healthy hormones, right, that whether you believe in God or evolution, right, has been developed in a way to allow human flourishing. They're manipulating that and placing it into a pathological state. But like this is being manifested physically in these kids. So like it's not just theoretical, right? They go into a state of menopause after you implant puberty blockers, right? You sterilize them, right? Permanently if it happens in a 10, 11-year-old kid who's Tanner stage 2. And in the W-Path files, you
Hmm.
had one of these doctors who said, of course, like these kids are miserable after puberty blockers because we put them into a state of menopause, right? So it's in that sense that, yeah, it's poisoning them because you're injecting or implanting a chemical into their body that's destroying their health, which is the same thing that would happen if you put cyanide or anything else into someone, or you drank
Microplastics.
your exactly. Oh yeah, yeah. Or you drank yourself into oblivion, or
Hmm.
you know, whatever else,
Well, so
any other
I
type of poisoning.
I've been looking at this issue for a long time, and I think my audience understands or probably shares my point of view that this is wrong. This is bad. This is, I mean, I go as far as saying it's child sacrifice to some sort of inhuman deity called gender. But and you align with that too. The only thing that I hear you saying that separates you from the trans doctors is ethics. Like, how do they see what they're doing as good? They wouldn't be doing it if they didn't see it as good. Can you understand or describe their point of view on seeing poison as life affirming?
Yeah, I think that it is two things, right? Ideology and censorship. Two changes that had become a defining feature of American medicine after March of 2022 with the onset of COVID,
Really?
because these are the two things that had driven the COVID um, disaster, where, and let me describe the ideology first, right? And it's kind of, I think, a root cause of many of the other, you know, characteristic madness that is afflicting our society. And the ideology specifically is this idea that truth is completely subjective, that it's not tied to the physical world. So truth is what you say it is, not something that you can prove with evidence.
Hmm.
So, this is concerning when you see it in a college classroom, right? But it's a completely different thing when it's driving the medical recommendations of a doctor.
Hmm.
So when they say like masks are safe and effective, that they prevent the spread of disease, right? That's not tied to any objective evidence. You can't provide any reliable data, right? That is, legitimate, that can provide support to that statement. It's simply the aggressive, forceful declaration of these statements that somehow make them true,
Yeah.
right? Just like, the forceful statement that a boy can become a girl. And but
Mm.
then that can't really become strong and proliferate without the second thing, which is censorship. Because within the academic medical community, the degree of censorship was something that, and is something that the average person cannot appreciate. Within major academic institutions, all around the country, if you're a doctor who has, you know, who simply recognizes the truth about what was happening, I mean, there was a major threat to your career. Either you would not get a promotion if you were hired there, you would not get letters of recommendation, or you would be outright fired. Which are things that like I was threatened with when I challenged what was happening with COVID, because like you would have people come in who were shot in the chest when I was doing trauma, and the first thing they would do is put a mask on them when they're in the trauma bay, which is the craziest thing ever because you just got shot in the chest. Our main concern is your airway, right? You don't want to obstruct someone's airway with some dirty piece of cloth. So ideology and censorship allows these people to exist within this impenetrable bubble of lies and self-righteousness.
Mm.
So they create this perceived, like this manufactured field of medicine, which they call quote unquote gender affirming care, right? Which is just a euphemism. And it's constructed using the foundation that was solidified during COVID. They have this ideology, right? They declare a truth that is subjective, which they can not back up with any objective evidence. They claim a boy can become a girl, right? And a girl can become a boy, and or anything in between these days. And they claim that it is true that blockers, hormones, surgery, social affirmation will help them, right? Will make their lives better and prevent suicide. And of course, we know that it's the exact opposite, right? It destroys their bodies. It likely increases the risk for suicide. And they're going to be tied to the boundaries of a hospital for the rest of their life. So that's the ideology. They say something is true that's obviously not true, but it's because the second component, censorship, that
Mm.
allows the ideology, right, which is just the scientific application of an idea, hence ideology, just like biology is the scientific application of the human study of living organisms, right? It's censorship that allows the ideology to remain institutionally legitimate in order to that you have all these major medical associations provided institutional support. Insurance companies provide financial reimbursement for
Mm.
legal
For the time
authorities
being. Yeah.
to, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. There's an there I want to argue or explore that there might be a third component to this. There's a glue, and it's the human imagination. You said that surgeons, the most exacting of all medical professionals, probably more or less. I don't want to put you on too high of a pedestal because then you will get a god complex, and I want to save you from that. Even surgeons are superstitious, right? So it's not just that a mask, like a mask, isn't proven to work, and then people want it to work, and so they enforce it. It's that there's a symbol there. The mask looks like it works. It feels like it works. There's something very magnetic, and that's why it makes it so evil. This concept of the trans kid. It in and of itself, it's got a magical, superstitious component that lodges and that makes it possible, this ideology and the censorship. Because it's not an ideology; it's a magic, it's a totem.
Yeah, yeah, and it's such a good point because like it's like this idea, right? It's like the idea has to be something that animates the human condition, right? That kind
Yeah.
of calls people to action. So the idea has to be something like magnificent. Yeah, like it has to have a totem. And that's why I think that the like Hannah Arendt, right? She had written a book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she had popularized the phrase "the banality of evil."
Yeah.
But I recently read something. It was kind of like a lame article, but it was someone at the very end, like the last two paragraphs, that really stood out. I have it saved, but it was really, really profound because it was an argument against Hannah Arendt's idea that evil is banal.
Hmm.
Because when you look at Eichmann, yeah, when he was standing on the like in
Nuremberg.
testimony after he got well, this was in Israel in the
Oh
1960s
yeah,
after he
you're right.
got captured by the Mossad in what was otherwise like the most amazing story of all time, how they captured him and brought him back to Israel for trial.
Hmm.
But yeah, he looked very banal on the stand, right? He's just kind of like this lame bureaucrat, right? But what had animated his rise to power was the exact opposite of banal, because everything with the ideology behind National Socialism was like these colorful flags, these boots, these trench coats, these symbols, this idea of like this Übermensch in Germany of like this magnificent German warrior, which is like, for them, that was like the what they created falsely as like their own god, but
Hmm.
which Eichmann and others had connected to. So like it was the exact opposite of banal. It was this like idea that they had created that like they had their totems that had made it worth sacrificing their own human dignity for and
Hmm.
do the most evil things to another human being.
Hmm.
So I think you're exactly correct. It's like the most magnificent aspects of the human imagination are
Yeah.
required to carry out the most physical and egregious and depraved forms
Yeah.
of, you know, like human, like kind of like criminal conduct towards other
Yeah.
humans. Like
I
you
would. I
have to
would.
have the idea.
Yeah. I would argue that that idea of the Nazis, that the Nazis are German manufactured, Germany manufactured for itself in order it enabled them to be inhumane. But if you look at what happened after or towards the end of that war, how they were treated was also inhumane. And it was
Mhm.
because they had project. One could argue that they projected this inhuman structure, and then people treated them just as everybody got caught up in that inhumanity, even their enemies. If you look at the what the Soviets did when they came in, and if you
Oh,
look at what
absolutely.
happened in Dresden, so it snowballs. It goes back and forth.
Yeah, yeah. It's
It
like
even
they had.
captures, hypnotizes the enemy.
Yeah, yeah, and because my grandfather was on my mom's side.
Hmm.
So I'm Jewish. My dad's Jewish. He's from Israel, but his
Hmm.
family's from Iraq. They're Iraqi Jews.
Wow,
They have lived there for like thousands of years. But on my mom's side, they're
all the way
Christian,
back to
and
Babylon, huh?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Huh.
yeah. And on my mom's side, they're Christian, and
Yeah.
uh, they were, they we could tie their family back to Germany. So my grandfather on my mom's side was drafted to the German army, right, in World War II, right? So, he fought for the Nazi army, but he was stationed in southern Italy, and he saw the extent of the crimes that were happening, like shipping Jews, from Italy to the concentration camps, death camps in Eastern Europe, and it was that thing that had even despite the fact that the evil had taken over the entire society, right? It was still those small people like my grandfather. He had saved Jews in Italy, right? Wrote fake papers to escape to North Africa.
Yeah.
But there's this component where they felt so ashamed because they had allowed their society to become captured in that way. So the destruction of their society afterwards was what many of them perceived to be, well, we did it to ourselves because we had destroyed ourselves. So of course we have to come to terms with the consequences for our actions.
Yeah. Um, I mean, in your darker moments, do you want to go scorch earth on the people perpetuating the crime of sterilizing, mutilating a generation of children?
Well, I think that There is this degree of kind of visual anger, really because it's what these kids are going to have to go through, and because that's really the driving factor is at the end of all this, what's happening, right? As crazy as all of it is, there are innocent children who are being harmed, but then also their families are being harmed because I've met a lot of these parents who they lose the person they care about the most,
Yeah.
and the dreams that they have for their children are being taken away by these corrupted doctors. So
Yeah.
there's anger towards these doctors who have abused their authority. Um, but I think that anger often has this negative connotation, but I believe that it is the way in which you use and harness your anger um, to to do something, to do what is right,
Yeah.
because like we're gonna fight this thing uh, to the very end, right? Like we will not let these people abuse their authority, right? They're trying to send me to prison for 10 years for exposing the fact that the largest children's hospital in the world, right? And what these doctors were doing to these children. And uh, we have to, and I have to use that anger for accountability and justice. So it's not revenge, right? It's justice
Well,
because
yeah.
these people have committed what is, in my estimation, legal crimes and moral crimes.
Yeah.
So there has to be accountability.
Well, what does that accountability look like to you then?
So I think there's a couple of different components, right? So for the doctors, there are a number of doctors in this country who have put out, made statements unequivocally that they know are not true, that blockers, hormones, social affirmation, surgery, all of it is safe, effective, that the benefits outweigh the risks, that the risk of suicide is greater than the risk of non-intervention. They have said these things which they know are not true. Because of this, a practice has persisted within the United States that has harmed children irreparably, right? So that, in my estimation, is criminal negligence on the highest level. People go to prison for criminal negligence. So that's one thing. People, these doctors, need to go to prison for doing what they have done. Because if I had a patient who was in my office and they said, "Hey doc, I'm really depressed, like I'm very sad, I'm thinking about harming myself." And I say, "You know what? Well, let me take out your gallbladder and your appendix because I have evidence to show you that it will improve your circumstances," right? And I show them a bunch of fraudulent studies to convince them. If I take that person to an operating room and do that surgery, I'm exposing them to all risk and no benefit, right? Because obviously, taking out someone's gallbladder appendix does not treat depression. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're proposing physical solutions for problems that exist within the mind. And they are using pathology of the mind as evidence of disease within the body,
Hmm.
which of course is completely insane. So that's number one. But then there's also within the federal government, right? There are people in the FBI, Health and Human Services, and Department of Justice who have weaponized and abused their authority to go after people like me who did not commit a crime, who fulfilled my responsibility as a surgeon to expose the fact that the largest children's hospital in the world was lying to the public to manipulate, mutilate, and sterilize kids. And for that, they're trying to throw me into prison for 10 years. And the trial starting a week after the birth of my first daughter. So what has to happen to those people is if there was criminal abuse of their positions, right? They have to be held accountable too, because we can guarantee if these people are not held accountable, it's only going to continue.
Hmm.
So people can say that as the consequences are too severe, like, oh, we don't want to become what we loathe. But the fact is it's not that at all. What we would be pursuing is justice because what these people have committed are crimes.
Hmm.
What they are pursuing is injustice because they are targeting the innocent in order to cover up for the criminals.
I guess going overboard would be for sterilizing them and their children. That would
Exactly.
be,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. What we're proposing is just making them accountable to the laws that already exist, you know, using a justice system that is already in place, right? So that's really all. That's my perception of justice is
yeah,
just using the laws on the books to hold people accountable for what they've done.
yeah,
Like just like if anyone steals a car or if a doctor lies to a patient and then harms them,
yeah.
right? These things are already illegal.
So I guess what one in your position has to rely on is that justice can be served, that the law itself has integrity still, and that the
Um,
apparatus that implements the law also has integrity.
less so because, you know, especially now, uh, especially under the Biden administration, we know that that's not the case, that the justice system has been corrupted. It doesn't serve to, in many instances, it does not serve to protect the innocent from criminals, but the criminals from the innocent, and that these people will not be held accountable. So, no, I have very, very little faith in the legitimacy of our justice system as it is now, because
Mm.
much of it has been captured. But even if that's the case, it doesn't absolve ourselves of the responsibility to do whatever we can do in
Okay.
order to hold them accountable.
Yeah.
So like even if they may not be representing justice, like we have to in our own lives, like we have to tell the truth. We have to be unafraid of the consequences of that truth, right?
Oh, so, I mean, that's kind of like the action point. Who is this we? Is it everyone? I hear it being used
Yeah, it's
specifically as you in your
me.
legal team, but also it's a
Yeah,
general
it's like
call.
the royal we, right? It's like me, you. It's like my
Yeah.
wife, my your family, my family, everyone. It's like if we want to live in a society where, like, if we consider ourselves citizens, right, who have rights who've been granted by a power higher than ourselves, then that is we, right? Then we have to do something. Because if we don't, then our children are going to live in a world where the rights are not granted by a power greater than ourselves, but by bureaucrats in DC, right? They will become subjects and serfs. And that's a world where, I will refuse to not fight against that.
Hmm. What in your life, your earlier life, your there seems like there was something that happened when you decided to stand up and speak out. There was what, 30, 40 years? You're very young from my
Yeah,
point of
I
view.
had 34. Yeah.
34, wow. So you have the 34 years. What in that first 34 years prepared you or instilled in you the value set to do what you did?
I a lot of it comes back to my family early on, but then also kind of what happened in my 20s and then what happened during COVID. But the first part is, so I grew up with stories about my family in Germany, right? My grandfather, even he never joined the Nazi party, and because of that, he lost everything because the people who joined the party were the ones who got economic
Hmm.
rewards from it, but he refused because he knew it was wrong. But he got drafted, right? Went to Italy, and instead of going along with everything, right, he saved Jews, helped them escape to Italy. And then on my dad's side, I mean, they had escaped Iraq, right? They had lost everything they ever had because during the 1930s and 40s, the Middle East had adopted the, this kind of aggressive, virulent hatred of Jews that kind of already existed, but it became um,
Hmm.
uh, like physically manifested in them killing them, right, with pogroms. And specifically, there was the Farhud, which started in 1941 in Iraq, where they just started killing all the Jews in Israel. So they had, or sorry, in Iraq. And then, so much of them, what they had to do was move to Israel. And in order to leave Iraq, they had all of their money, all of their property stolen from them. And so my grandparents, when they moved to Israel, lived in tents, right? And they were one of the founding generations of Israelis. So it's like you hear these stories of, and then my
Hmm.
family fighting in the wars of, over the years. And so you had people in my family who did the right thing when it was the most difficult thing to do. But then, as I get older, right, it's like you think we live in a time that exists at the end of history,
Yeah.
right? Like
Hmm.
that's like the zeitgeist during the 90s and 2000s, that it's a unipolar world, right? Where America is like the top dog and we defeated Nazism and communism. And, now it's like things are like great, right? It's like we have this great alliance of powers in Western Europe and the United States. And like our lives are going to be boring and mundane and like routine. But so I, but I started reading a lot when I was in my 20s. I would read stories about history.
What was driving
Uh,
you? What was your curiosity?
I was a big lefty, right? I was a hardcore leftist. I was like
Yeah.
like like kind of because that's kind of like the assumed um, position when you're growing up. When I did, right? It's like because everything in the media and TV and
Your
entertainment is like, oh,
schooling.
like
Yeah.
right wing is bad, liberals are good, right? So,
Yeah.
but then a couple things happened, in international politics where it's like you just see the media lying in the most vicious way. So it kind of opens up your mind to, well, if they can lie about this, what else are they lying about?
Hmm.
So I began reading a lot about history, about economics and historical fiction, and then philosophy and all this. And I still thought like, man, my world's going to be like all these stories from history are a time in the past. Like, they will never happen in my life because again, like we live in at the end of history. Um, and but then COVID happened in March of 2020. And
Where were
then
you at? You're in school at this point?
I was in my surgical training.
Okay.
So I was able to see what academic medicine was like
Hmm.
before COVID and after. And it was like everything had changed in the matter of a week, where like when a patient was dying beforehand, um, we would make sure their family was there so they could be there during the last moments. It'd like form this semicircle around the patient. So while the person, takes their last breath and descends to a place that, to, place beyond, this earth, their family, the people who care about them the most, will be by their side when they take that last breath, right? We would make sure to like preserve human dignity when people were dying. But then after COVID, all that changed, right? Where I would see all these people, take care of hundreds of patients who suffered and died alone, where, we would force people with, you know, difficulty breathing, with respiratory issues to wear a mask, and they would suffer. And then we had these children who would come into the hospital with the most unimaginable signs of abuse because they were being locked down. They were being kept in their homes in these awful environments because of something that was obviously untrue. And it was doctors who were perpetuating the whole thing and going along with it. It's because doctors did not speak up that all of this was able to happen. And because I was a resident, like I have the most contact with patients, right? Because
Oh,
I'm the
yeah.
one, yeah, yeah. Like when you're at the bottom of the totem pole, you're the one who does everything for them. You change their wounds, you talk to their family, you explain everything. Like that's your position. That's what your job is as a surgical resident. It's like you're like the bottom of the barrel, right? Like in the
Yeah.
hierarchy. So like I got to see their suffering and how all of it was just being driven by doctors. So to answer your question, like what had driven me to yeah, even though there's a huge amount of risk, which I'm seeing now, of course, but that's what's going to happen if this is what's going to happen if doctors don't speak up. So like how can I live with myself if I stand by and do nothing? The fear of not doing something is to go back into the world that I lived in during COVID and the time before that, because once I decided to just speak the truth and do what was necessary to protect these vulnerable children, right? That's a world that I do not want to go back to, where I have to lie to myself, where I have to bend the knee in order to serve this evil ideology. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's why. Yeah.
Yeah. There's such a momentum. You bring up people making a wrong decision and then having to cover their butts and doubling down over and over again. And then you have a lot of cowardice allowing people who don't want to take the risk of being slighted, of not being invited to dinner parties, or not even getting certain sorts of accounts or opportunities because they're speaking out because they're being hard on the system. And that is the case in the gender ideology aspect of this story. But you bring up COVID, and the entire system is culpable. The entire medical system, the government system, the WHO, the CDC, like the entire structure then becomes culpable for perpetuating massive amounts of harm. And we can, I don't know the stats at all, but we know the loss of developmental and academic harms perpetuated against the whole generation is just undeniable. They're never going to take accountability. I mean, God can hold anything accountable, but like within the bounds of human justice, like you have to have something bigger than that which is someone bigger than the one is being punished. The punisher has to be bigger than the punished, just in order for it to work out. Like so, something like
Yeah.
COVID, I don't
Yeah.
see
And
any movement at all towards accountability.
I think I
All I see is a lessening of censorship because at this point in time, I'm pretty sure YouTube is not going to tag this video, let alone kick my channel off again for talking about
yeah,
COVID. So there's a
I
little bit
didn't.
of oversight.
Yeah, you're right. That's probably. I mean, in your position too, it's like yeah, like you during that time you would risk losing everything. But
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's and think about that. You risk losing everything to say something that was obviously true. But you bring up a really good point, which is the ones who are enacting justice have to have a institutional authority that is greater than the ones who have perpetuated crime. But that's theoretical, but then there's nuts and bolts to that is there
Hmm.
are people who have to be in power. They have to hold certain positions in certain districts, and there has to be prosecutors who are willing to pursue certain cases. And I think that there's this slow but growing sentiment within this new kind of, some people would say it's your political right, but I think it's less right versus left
Hmm.
because it encompasses this entire amalgamation of people who feel completely disaffected from traditional politics, both like Republicans and Democrats. Because even though I would have considered myself a Republican, like the only group of people I loathe more than like these like gender doctors and all of them
It's
are,
the
you know,
GOP.
is these traditional GOP people because
Yeah.
at least these other people they'll say these awful things and they'll follow through. But
Yeah.
then you have these establishment politicians who, will say certain things, but then just lie and do the exact opposite.
Yeah.
So it's like the people who are supposed to be standing up for the values and virtues of our country are just lying about it. Of
Hmm.
course, now there are more people, right, within this kind of new movement who are beginning to see like, well, no, we can't do that anymore. And so not to say that all people in the GOP are bad. I think that it's becoming a lot better, a whole lot better now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like there are things that we can do. Like it's not just some dream. I think that one day we can hold these people accountable for what they've done.
Hmm.
Because just like with COVID, I mean, like there's the list is never ending as to the harms. But I remember there was one girl who came into the hospital during COVID, and it's kind of when everything became very real to me, where it was like 2021 or early 2022, well, probably 2021 because it was still during lockdowns. So during that time, early 2021, where a girl came in, she must have been like 12 years old, but she looked like she was 7 and she was malnourished and she had cigar burns all over her. And we did a bunch of x-rays and she had all these broken bones. But the reason she came into the hospital is because her thumb was hanging off. Her thumb, it was cut in
Jesus.
half, but she was
Yeah.
also missing a bunch of other fingers because her parents were putting her fingers into a wall fan as a form of punishment, and cutting off her fingers. And then her thumb had been cut off, but it was still hanging on by a piece of bone. So it got infected.
Yeah.
So, and the more we looked into, so I took care of this girl for a couple of weeks while she was in the hospital. But, uh, you know, it was because she was at home during the lockdowns that her family were abusing her, because there was no way that the school, would miss these bruises all over her and like this acute decrease in her weight. I mean, like her hemoglobin, which is a lab test we look at to measure the amount of red blood cells in your body. We thought she had leukemia because her blood count was so low,
Hmm.
but it was actually that just she was just being malnourished. And so like, but we saw stories like this all the time. A lot of these kids would just come in dead, because they were being abused. So you become really familiar with the sound a mother makes when you tell her that her child is dead. But like these were things that were a product of corrupted doctors. They locked down our society, and because of that, there was a incalculable amount of human suffering. These people who said that this was the right thing to do knew it was not the right thing to do. They did it for an ideology, and they protected themselves because of censorship. We know this now. All we have to do is hold these people accountable
Hmm.
by the rules that in the laws that already exist within our society.
Hmm. Is I sense that you have a special insight into life. I mean, not that you're special itself, but it sounds like you have a spiritual sense of life. Is that true? And where when did you discover that?
Well, I've always, I grew up Jewish, and I always had
That
well,
doesn't
yeah,
save you from atheism any more than growing up Catholic does.
yeah, yeah. No, I always had a strong sense of faith, but then, yeah, it was during that time in my, teens and early 20s where I was kind of like a uber liberal, where I considered myself like a hardcore atheist.
Hmm.
But then as time went on, it's like you start reading more about history and life, and then about spirituality, and then Judaism, and then Christianity. And then you realize like, but then it was really when everything was happening during COVID. And then with my story as well, especially with my story, because the sequence of events that have happened over the last 2 years, ever since all of it started, is just too strange to be chance alone.
Hmm.
So with each passing day, I realize that the forces driving divine providence are real and are something that like are are absolutely true, in that God has had a hand in everything that's happened. Because it's just, look at the world we live in. There's like, reality has become stranger than fiction, but
Hmm.
you have these stories and these uh in so many different places where you think, man, like
Hmm.
there's so much goodness still in the world despite the fact that there's so much evil.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, there was a part of me, especially in the past 2 years, that has rediscovered that like faith in God, right? In a higher power, is the most important thing. Because
Really?
at some point, yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
no, no, truly, yeah. Because I mean, like, do I feel fear like about what is to come? Like, yes, I do, because there's a chance that I won't be there for the first couple of years of my daughter's life, right? But
Hmm.
the one thing I fear the most is that one day I will have to face judgment by a higher power. So I fear that greater than anything that can happen on this earth, right? Like if you live true according to the covenant, right? Whether it's Christianity or Judaism, right? It's then it's not like we have to ask God to protect us, but it's we have to, we realize that God will reward us. So
Hmm. Well, you bring up the carrot and the stick, but there's also like a reality to it, a relational aspect. At least in Christianity, they preach beyond the judgment and the salvation. There's the relationship that you have with the living God, like God
yeah,
is living. So, if you don't mind me probing into that, like
yeah.
when you come to these conclusions about faith and about religion, like what's your positive step? Like, how do you implement that?
Well, it's
Where
the
do you
most
go with
real. I
that?
mean, it's the most real thing you could ever imagine. I mean, it's like,
Huh.
and that's what I've realized is like the more you believe in it and the more faith you have, and but the more you believe in it, but then act in accordance with it, right? So even
Mm,
if it means taking a huge risk, like, right, I took this huge risk simply to tell the truth, right? To do what was true, right? These people were lying, right? It's my responsibility to do something about it, right? You're acting in accordance with a covenant that was not defined by me, but defined by something greater that people have not, like this, not created as true, but discovered as true.
mhm,
So when you act in accordance with it, you realize that, yeah, like this fear and destruction that you thought my life was going to be brought to is actually the exact opposite.
hmm.
That like the more you act in accordance with the covenant, the more you are rewarded for it. So like, you think that it's just going to be like this perpetual stress and fear and loathing, but it's the exact opposite. You become free. Like for the first time in my life,
Really?
once I told the truth, you
Yeah.
become free, and then you have a sense of peace where you can look at yourself and then say, like, I don't have to live by lies anymore. So whatever these people do to me, right, they can't take that away. So it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, there's nothing they can do to me because
Yeah.
when you live according to what's real and what's true, right, according to the covenant defined by God, then
Yeah.
um, you know, whatever consequences on this earth don't matter.
Well, that being said, we still have to save your butt and kick theirs, which is a lot of work, a lot of resources. Like, what are the nuts and bolts of your case? Like, what is going on? I don't need anything that's not good for the case, but like, what's going on? Where is it headed? And what can people do to
Yeah.
help out?
Yeah, and that's what I realized too is that like the only way to yeah, so it's like whatever they want to do to me, right? It's we have the power to overcome it because these people are acting with viciousness. But then also, if you fight back, right? If you hold these people accountable, right? Like even though I'm a no one, right? Like I had no social media. Like we were very private people. We live in a very small town. I work in an even smaller town.
Wow.
So we decided to fight back, right? And because we decided to fight back, right? Like we didn't have to ask God to save us, but He rewarded us, right? So by telling the truth, by standing up for ourselves, we've raised over $1 million in 500 to
Wow.
$250 donations.
Wow.
And if anyone wants to help donate, it's givesendgo.com/Texas_whistleblower. And not only that, but like we've told our story to tens of millions of people, like across the whole country.
Yeah.
Some of the most powerful, conservative politicians in our country has come out and said, like,
Yeah.
we support you, we're going to help protect you. And I'm a no one, right? So, but to answer your question specifically, you know, because people have been so generous, they've been willing to sacrifice part of themselves for this cause. We've been able to sustain our legal battle.
Hmm.
And that's one thing I realized is that to take this to federal court is it's so much more expensive than we thought. Because the reason people lose so often in federal court is because it's so difficult to navigate the rules and regulations concerning evidence and things like that. It's like very technical. So you have to make sure you get amazing lawyers. And
Yeah.
I've been very, very fortunate and blessed that my attorneys have been able to
Hmm.
navigate that process and be willing to fight this. So yeah, we're going to go to court in October. But their indictment, their allegations, what they're bringing this case on is the first time they've ever brought something like this in American history. Like
Yeah.
it's never happened before. Using HIPAA to go after someone who exposed the fact that the largest children's hospital in the world was lying, despite the fact that I was working there and no identifiable information was released, and the fact that within 24 hours the conduct was just reaffirmed as illegal, right? And
Hmm.
that they had acknowledged themselves that this was potentially criminal.
Mm.
Um, so all we have to do is fight back,
Yeah.
and the story of what really happened is more shocking than people have than even I thought. It really, because now we're learning things that
Really?
we didn't know before. Yeah. But that'll have to come out in trial in October.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it's really shocking.
I want to ask a question and do what you want with it. It seems a little personal, but how is this change? How is your marriage to the truth and you following out your conscience changed your marriage or changed you as a husband specifically?
Yeah, I think that's and one of the things that I would say is most important because you think you love someone before uh, something like this happens, but then afterwards it's you you realize how much that love means and
Mm.
how much you care for. Like I met my wife in 2019, and I knew I was going to marry her the first day I met her.
Wow.
So yeah, it was like this love that I knew wasn't like this like flame, just like it wasn't just like some firework that goes up, blast, and then comes out. It's kind of like this,
Mm.
like salt of the earth type of love, where it's like, no, we were meant to be together. And it's like the recognition of like in Judaism, it's like we all kind of are part of like this divine system, right? Where you have these stars that come down to earth, and then it's the marriage of these two components which finally reunites this one soul that has always meant to be together, right? And that's what I feel. And I mean, she's a federal prosecutor, right? She works at the Department of Justice.
Ooh. She's part of the system.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she's like tough as nails, like
Wow.
fearless.
Yeah.
And so this has made our marriage so much stronger than I
Really?
could have ever thought it would be. Yeah, yeah. And you realize how much you love someone, and
Really?
especially now that we're bringing our baby girl into this world, right? Where you know how like you hope that if you stand up and do something that there carries risk, but you believe that's true, you really hope and pray that the person you love the most will stand by you, right, and take that risk. And she has,
Yeah.
and it's
That's a
the greatest thing.
tremendous thing to ask, and that
Yeah,
shows you
yeah,
proof. Again, another blessing.
yeah, yeah. And something that she understands too is like, you know, this is not just theoretical, but real. Like, we're going to bring a daughter into this world.
Yeah.
And do we want to bring her into a place where the most powerful federal leviathan in human history can go after people who simply tell the truth?
Yeah.
No, like, no, we can't. So even if that means, you know, sacrificing something, right, then we have to do it.
Hmm. When you're not saving lives, making babies, and correcting the evil of the United States government, what's your like normal hobby?
Yeah, well, it's kind of sad because so I do a lot of reading. I like listen to a ton of audiobooks.
Yeah.
Um, but then so I still do that a lot. I play music. I played music growing up. I originally went to college for music, but
Yeah.
then I realized like I'm not that good. So I didn't want to like eat spaghetti sauce and like live in a van my whole life.
Yeah.
Like my best friend growing up is now like an internationally known DJ. He like gets flown around and
Wow.
he's like a musical savant, like in the actual sense of the term, where he can listen to something and just play it immediately. But I still play music a lot, love doing that. But my big thing, my huge hobby was firearms, building guns, all that. But
Really?
after, yeah, yeah, yeah. But after this felony indictment, I had to give up my guns. So until the trial
Really?
was over. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because you're a
Yeah,
criminal now, or what?
if you're under felony indictment, you cannot have possession of a firearm or any dangerous
Huh.
weapons. So I had to give them all up,
Okay.
which sucks, which really sucks. But
Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
mean, they're
yeah,
freeing up your mind to concentrate even more on taking them down.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, because it's really it's yeah, because I loved long range shooting, where you can build
That's
a
a relevant
rifle.
conversation about right now.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Well, I would say 100 something yards, for Trump is like kind of like the beginner level shooting, it's like,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, a whole different thing, but totally insane. at like 130 yards is a chip shot, right?
Yeah.
Where the point of aim is the point of impact, right? For any standard 223, 308, whatever rifle.
Yeah.
Yeah, where and but it was like the construction of those rifles, learning how to shoot out to,
Yeah.
500, 600, 700 yards where, like you have to incorporate so many different aspects where
Hmm.
like your breathing, your stance, the trigger, your rifle, your optic, how far you aim off the point of impact in order to compensate for wind and elevation, all that.
Gravity. Yeah.
And and that's, the reason I think so many people are into it is because it's just like a different form of truth, because it's like accuracy is
Hmm.
where the intention is in line with the end result. So if you aim at something, you hope that the cartridge and the bullet will hit the intended target. So, to like have a target out 500 yards and pull a trigger and, something hits right in the middle of it, that's pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You're an amazing man, Ethan.
Yeah. Thank you. And
What?
for the record, I have no firearms, it's like I had to give
Yeah.
all those
No.
up.
Of course.
Yeah.
You were just pining, nostalgic about your
Yeah. 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 No,
rifle
but
prowess. Yeah.
yeah, no, I like to, I mean, it's like to be able to build things in the physical world, like that's what I try to do, and music is the same thing too. It's like where it's like this physical thing, right? It's like you can take something completely uh that has not been created, but then through pain and suffering of like learning how to play an instrument, through like just
Hmm.
sucking for like years on end.
Yeah.
You just suck a little bit less, but then you can like really kind of play some tunes, that's pretty awesome. So it's
Yeah.
like whatever emotion you're feeling, you can manifest in the world through like this,
Manipulation of
like
matter.
sequence
Yeah.
of, yeah, this manipulation of these chords and these strings in order to give rise to like this kind of super crazy frequency of waves that will come to be perceived in a certain way.
Hmm. So you've been on a whirlwind tour of podcasts, um, and it sounds like you're totally busy. Thank you very much for taking time out of your really busy schedule to speak with me. Where can are you writing something? Are you present somewhere if people want to get involved more with your even just with your case or with your general thoughts? Do you have time and a place where those are collected?
Yeah. Well, if so, first of all, most important thing is if people do want to help to my legal fund, it's givesendgo.com/Texas_whistleblower, and that's the most important thing for us now is helping to fund our
Hmm.
legal case,
Yeah.
and everything that people donate, means the world to us. But otherwise, I'm on Twitter. It's my first and last name. Luckily
I'll
it's
link it in the
spelled.
description, but
Yeah, yeah, it's pronounced Haim. It's the first name
oh,
is
Eitan,
very,
I'm
it's tough.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, it's a tough
my
one because
bad.
it's spelled Ethan because it's a Hebrew name, but it's pronounced in German phonetics.
Oh, well,
Um,
best of both worlds.
yeah, yeah. So my dad was working when I was born, and then my mom spelled it how a German person would. But then after I was born and my mom sent in the birth certificate, my dad gets back from work and is like, "Oh, you spelled it wrong." But they were immigrants, so they couldn't figure out how to get the birth certificate back.
Oh,
So it's just spelled incorrectly in perpetuity. So it's like it's supposed to
okay.
be Etan, but whatever, it's fine.
Eitan. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. So and that's. And I write a lot. I've kept a journal since 2020. But that's more of a private thing.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
one day people can
Yeah.
see it. But
Yeah.
who
For
knows?
sure. For sure. Well, I'm gonna wrap up the recording right now. Thank you very much. I'll send all the links to your work are down there in the description, including your Give, Send, Go. Thank you very much, Aiton.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool. And then the recording. Sorry, I